We ended the previous module by summarizing the assumptions and predictions behind the pure expectations theory. The prediction of this theory is that long-term interest rates will be the geometric average of expected future short-term rates. However, that prediction fails to answer an important question. Why is an upward sloping yield curve considered normal? Is it reasonable to believe that most of the time investors expect interest rates to rise in the future? Logically, the answer is probably not. Over the long run, interest rates rise as much as they fall, and therefore it would not be rational to expect rises more often than falls. Clearly, something else is happening which causes an upward sloping yield curve to be more common than any other. Something is causing long-term interest rates to be, on average, higher than they would be based on pure expectations. The liquidity premium theory says that that something is caused by an increase in risk for longer-term securities. Long-term investments carry a variety of risks. The most significant is interest rate risk, which means that changes in interest rates cause a larger change in the value of long-term securities than they do for short-term securities. Other risks are also possible, such as a greater likelihood of default and greater sensitivity to changes in the inflation rate. If long-term investments are riskier, we can therefore assume that investors have a preference for short-term investments. To an extent, they still look for value, but they also have a preference for short-term or more liquid investments. However, some borrowers will still want to borrow long-term, so they are going to have to offer slightly higher interest rates to attract investors towards long-term investments. We call this additional return a liquidity premium. Premium in this case means extra, so long-term investors are offered extra return to entice them to give up liquidity and invest long-term. If this is the case, we would expect the yield curve to be largely based on expectations, but for there to be an upward bias in the yield curve that we actually observe. This means that the yield curve is tilted upward compared with what would be the case based on pure expectations, with little change for short-term securities but a higher and higher premium for long-term securities. If the pure expectations yield curve would otherwise be flat, the liquidity premium results in an upward sloping yield curve. This is probably the reason why upward sloping yield curves are those most commonly observed. A liquidity premium does not mean that we can't have a downward sloping yield curve. It just means that the observed yield curve is flatter or less downward sloping than would be the case based on pure expectations. We can now finish our summary of the liquidity premium theory. We've introduced the assumptions, and based on our discussion we can predict that there will be an upward bias in the observed yield curve over and above what would be the case based on pure expectations.